Happy Wednesday, 6th grade. Welcome to Science Lesson 2. Yesterday we took on Lesson 1, which was what is a cell? A cell is the basic unit of life that can still carry out its life activities. We sometimes say it's the smallest unit that can carry out life's activities. Today we're going to look at the little pieces that make up a cell, but guys, these little pieces by themselves can't carry on life. That's why we don't call one of these organelles like the nucleus a cell or the smallest unit, because they have to all be working together to be able to get those things there. Yesterday we worked through the cell theory. Remember, there's three parts to that cell theory. I just talked about the middle part, all that cells are the smallest unit of life. The first part said all living things are made up of one or more cells, and the last part says cells only come from existing cells. And so tomorrow's lesson is going to teach us how we create new cells. Today we're just going to look up what makes up a cell as we go through this. We have our question that we're trying to answer as we go through today. What are the functions of the organelles? The organelles are all these things that make up the pieces, the parts of a cell. Cells share common features, but they also show striking differences. Each cell part performs a different job. So guys, this is a picture of an animal cell you can see here, and up here is a picture of a plant cell. All of these that we're going to talk about with parts of an animal cell are also in the plant cell, and then a plant cell we're going to talk over here has a couple of differences. Please understand, this is not literally what a cell looks like. If I would put a cell underneath a microscope, they don't come in all these little pretty colors like that for me. This is a drawing magnified so that we can show students what they look like. And then they come in different colors so that they stand out for us. Let's get rolling. You got your notes ready to rock and roll. It says to stay alive, all cells must perform certain life functions. Remember, yesterday we got a list of what it means to be alive, what a cell has to do to be considered living. Here we go at it again. A cell must get, store, and release energy. You have your first blank, so somehow you have to obtain nutrients, right? You must also make proteins that we're going to learn coming up is the building block of cells. You need to release waste. In other words, get rid of the bad. That's your next blank. And you need to recycle materials. So then your third blank there, guys. So that's functions that living cells do to be considered alive. Getting rid of the bad, reusing things, or breaking things back down. You'll see some of the organelles that do that. A cell needs to control what enters and exits it, and finally a cell needs a control center to direct cell activities and store information. Okay, so they gave a few more things, and we're going to talk about the organelles that do this. The control center is your nucleus. What enters and exits over here is your cell membrane. Okay, these life tasks are performed by cell organelles. Number 2, organelles are structures that perform specific functions within the cell. As you read and study the diagram of an animal cell, notice the functions of each organelle. Okay, so now I'm going to start to work around, and you're going to get this big list as we go through that, these organelles. Some are vocabulary words, some are not. First one, the endoplasmic reticulum. They call it the ER as an abbreviation, so it's not a big word. Is a network of folded membranes, so these are these things that weave back and forth here. It serves as the cell's transportation system. It also helps make proteins and other substances needed by the cell. So guys, when I look at this cell, I say, okay, there's a little bit here, and then there's a little bit there. Please understand the endoplasmic reticulum is all over the cell. It transports what it needs. So it's going to come in through the cell membrane, and it's going to travel by the endoplasmic reticulum to the different things that need it, whether it's the mitochondria, whether it's the vacuoles, whether it's the lysosomes, the ribosomes. The material that is needed by these parts are going to get there by this. So this whole system, guys, is connected. Okay? Hopefully you have blank A filled in. Blank B. The nucleus directs the cell's activities. It contains the cell's operating instructions and stores information that will be passed along to new cells. I sometimes call this the brains. So this is the transportation, this is the brains. It tells it what to do. Nucleus is usually in the center of the cell. Okay. A vacuole contains fluid and is surrounded by a membrane. Vacuoles store water and nutrients and help the cell digest food. So we have storage centers. In animals. There's a lot of them, but they're small, okay? We're going to talk about the difference in plants over here, which has one huge one. Ribosomes begin the process of making proteins. So it's going to take the nutrients that we need and it's going to start making the proteins. Proteins are what make up your DNA, which make you you. And so ribosomes help do that process. You've got A, B, C, D here as we're cruising along. Here comes E. Lysosomes contain powerful chemicals that break down harmful molecules and recycle worn out cell parts. So you and I sometimes put bad things into our body with what we eat, with what we drink, things like that. We got to break those things down. We also have our own body that is breaking down. In other words, cells get old and die. The parts of the cells get old and die. Our lysosomes have to break those things down, remove them from the cell, and then that passes out of your body as waste. So that's the job of lysosomes. Moving on is cytoplasm. Cytoplasm is the fluid substance containing the organelles. It lies between the nucleus and the cell membrane. So guys, this whole thing here, I like to think of it as picture a ball. Inside the ball are all kinds of marbles that are all these different organelles, and the ball is filled with water so that the marbles have cushioning kind of thing, so that it's not just clunk, 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 but they move around. That water, that fluid, is the cytoplasm. So cytoplasm is like, man, they contain all these organelles. It just gives the cell shape and makes it like a shock absorber for them, okay? That should have been letter F. Letter G, the cell membrane. The cell membrane contains the internal and maintains the internal environment of the cell. In other words, it gives it its shape. It holds it together. It allows food to enter the cell and waste to exit. So I kind of wrote myself a little hint. I like to think of it as a wall with a gate on it. Sometimes we talk about the cell membrane's the door, but I don't want you to think the cell membrane is just this door right here. Like you can get in here and you can get out here. The cell membrane is this whole thing around the edge that gives it its shape. Without the cell membrane, everything spills out. So we hold it together and then things will pass in and out of it. We'll talk about that on the next pages. Then way up here at the top is letter H. The job of the mitochondria, that's plural. Mitochondrion is singular, so same thing guys, just singular and plural. The job of the mitochondria is to convert chemical energy of food into a form that the cell can use. So I have my answer for H. We call this the powerhouse. So I don't know if you want to write that in parentheses on the side, but this is what gives you power. It's going to convert my glucose, the sugar that I need, and say, okay, you got that, but the cell can't use that. I'm going to take that, I'm going to turn it into a usable energy for us. This is our powerhouse. If you remember yesterday, it talked about we discovered mitochondria. We also talked about muscles having a lot of mitochondria. They'll talk about that over here because of the things that they do. Okay. I'm going to hit these last two over here. A cell wall is a rigid wall that lies outside the cell membrane. It provides support. So you're down here, that's I, a cell wall. Now guys, maybe you want to put a note next to I and J. These are only in plants. Only a plant has a cell wall. We'll talk about that coming up in a second, but make sure you understand that. This is what makes a tree stand upright. And gives it some rigidity. We even look at grass, and you're like, well, grass can blow in the wind. Yes, I understand that, guys, but a grass can still be standing up, okay? So anything that gives it any kind of support, it doesn't mean it's like a tree and can't wiggle at all with like a tree trunk, guys. It just means it makes it a little bit stronger. We'll talk about a vacuole. We already mentioned it, how in animals they're small, in plants there's one big one. Then the last feature, letter J, is chloroplasts. Chloroplasts contain chlorophyll. Chlorophyll is the green color. It's what makes plants' leaves green. Chlorophyll is what traps sunlight, and then the sunlight is used in the process called photosynthesis, which takes sun energy and turns it into food energy. It turns it into a chemical energy, guys, and that's why plants can make their own food. Because animals do not have chloroplasts, they cannot make their own food. We talked about that in chapter 1. You and I can't make our own food. We have to get our food from plants directly or from an animal who eats a plant. That would be indirectly. Okay, so you got all this done. Now we'll go back over here so we can get a fill in these last few notes over here for 4 and 5. In a multicellular organism, different kinds of cells have different roles. Cells with different functions have different organelles or a different number of organelles. What do they mean by that? For example, your muscles have many mitochondria, sometimes hundreds and thousands of them, because muscle cells need a lot of energy to cause movement. Skin cells do not have many mitochondria. Skin just sits there. Okay, so in your notes, muscle cells have more mitochondria because they need way more energy to try to get us to move our bodies. Skin cells is just protecting you, doesn't need a whole lot of mitochondria in it. So what they're saying is, in this pretty picture, you might have a skin cell pictured, you'd have 1 or 2 mitochondria. In a muscle cell, if you had it pictured, you might have 10, 50, 100 mitochondria pictured because they have way more mitochondria. They differ among themselves based on what their specific task is. Paragraph 2, you may have guessed that plant cells and animal cells differ in some ways. Plant cells contain chloroplasts, we talked about that, the organelle that contains chlorophyll. Okay, so you got that one, contains chloroplasts. Plants need chlorophyll to carry on photosynthesis. We'll get a whole lesson on photosynthesis coming up in a few chapters. Okay, compare the plant and the animal cells. Do you see any other differences between the two cells? Most plant cells have one large vacuole. Animals have many smaller ones. Okay, and last, now look at the outside of the plant cell. It has a cell wall. Animal cells do not have a cell wall. So there are 3 major differences between plants and animals. Plants have chloroplasts, chlorophyll. Plants have one large vacuole, animals many smaller ones. Plants have a cell wall, animals do not. Great question to ask you on a worksheet or a test, the difference between those things. Turning the page in your books to page 36 and 37, or following along as I'm cruising on, we're ready to start to talk about these last 2 things, what diffusion is and how we get what we need. You already know that the cell has many organelles, but did you know that a cell, especially its cytoplasm, is mostly water? In fact, about 2/3 of the mass of a cell is water. Number 6, substances needed by the cell, such as nutrients or salts, are dissolved in the water. Where do these dissolved substances come from? Okay, so what I need in my body is dissolved in water, and then that water is going to go back and forth across the cell membrane to me, and we're going to see how that works coming up. In most cases, a substance moves from area where it is plentiful to areas where it's less plentiful. For example, think about dropping a sugar cube into a glass of iced tea. What happens? Even if you don't stir it, individual particles of sugar slowly move away from those in the cube. Eventually, all of the sugar particles will diffuse or spread throughout the iced tea. Your definition here, coming for number 7, the movement of a substance from an area of higher concentration to an area of its lower concentration is called diffusion. So this is the picture of diffusion, guys. I look at this picture right here. Way more blue dots outside the cell, way less blue dots inside the cell. We want to go from areas where there's more to areas where there's less. That's diffusion. You look here, now there's about the same outside as there is inside. So if this was the particle that I need dissolved in water, it's going to move right in until they're equal. The same can also be true on the inside. I now am producing waste products, and we're going, hey, we got all these waste products in the cell. How are we going to get them out? Way more inside, less outside. The particles will naturally pass out in the water and get outside the cells until there's the same amount inside and outside. So good stuff coming in by diffusion, bad stuff going out by diffusion. That's what they're talking about. Okay? Some substances enter and leave a cell through this process. Notice some. We'll talk over here how others get in. The diagram below shows what happens during diffusion. Diffusion occurs because the particles that make up matter are always moving. As they move, the particles bump into each other and move apart. Back to your notes for number 8. Over time, the particles will spread out until they are evenly spread throughout this area. Same inside as outside. Good. Number 9 is coming over here on the cell membrane. The cell needs many substances. The cell membrane controls the environment inside the cell. Only some substances can pass through a cell membrane by diffusion. Many substances are made of small particles, so they can diffuse across the membrane. Give me some examples. Oxygen, water, carbon dioxide. Those can diffuse across a cell membrane. Number 9, larger particles though, such as salts and proteins, your blank, cannot get in there. So we're saying, okay, if you can't just diffuse there, how are you going to get there? Here's how it works. Here's how diffusion works in a cell. Cells of a living things are surrounded by water as they contain a lot of water. The water both inside and outside the cell contains many dissolved substances, including oxygen. The cell constantly uses oxygen, so more oxygen particles usually are in the water surrounding a cell than is inside a cell. The particles of oxygen move through the cell membrane from outside the cell where there are more of them into the cell where there's less. So guys, go back here. What they're saying is pretend these blue dots are oxygen molecules. My cell needs those things. So we bring the oxygen into the cell through diffusion. Great. Now we're going to go through the process. You and I know I breathe in oxygen, I breathe out carbon dioxide. And so my cell is using that oxygen. When it does that, it churns oxygen into carbon dioxide. Now I got too much carbon dioxide. I don't want that. So I now remove the carbon dioxide through diffusion outside. Okay? Diffusion happens without energy. Guys, to get these larger particles into your cells, it just takes energy. It's not a big deal. It's not like I'm going to be exhausted from this happening. It's happening automatically. It just doesn't do it without energy. Okay, so now we're going to give you a special term for the diffusion of water. Diffusion is this stuff happening in general. Now we're going to get a special term for it. Because cells can't function without water, the movement of water through the cell membrane is very important. The diffusion of water across the cell membrane is called osmosis. Number 10. You can see in the pictures what can happen if a cell doesn't have enough water. It will shrink. Number 11. Can you see in the photo how the cytoplasm has pulled away from the cell wall? So here's what we want it to look like. We don't have enough water, so the cell cytoplasm is shrinking in, and you have these gaps here, guys. When that happens, the pressure on the cell wall is reduced. The result is that the cell walls of the plant can't support the plant, and the plant begins to wilt. So that is what is happening. You were challenged with this a couple lessons ago when we worked our skill to say what causes the plant to wilt. There's not enough water inside and outside. Now, why isn't there enough water inside the cell? Because there's not enough water outside. So when it gets really dry, the dirt doesn't have water in it, and therefore there's not enough water to make it equal on the inside and the outside. So the cell says, we don't got any water to pull because there's nothing in the soil for us. We start to wilt. Wilting is a plant's process of trying to stay alive. We always going to say the plant's dying. No, the leaves are dying. A plant is smart enough to say, I'm going to start sacrificing some things that I can live without to try to maintain the main stem and root, which I can't live without. Okay, we can have the opposite problem. Too much water can be a problem, especially for animal cells. If too much water moves into the cell, it could burst. The cell membrane helps the cell keep a proper balance of all materials inside the cell. So guys, it's crazy to think about, but you can actually drink too much water. Lots of times as you and I drink water, we just say, okay, I can feel that I'm full, I have enough water, or I'm not thirsty anymore, and we stop. But you can see the chain reaction of this. If I have a cell that bursts, the water that was in that cell is now outside the cell. Well, there was already too much water out there, and so it would create this chain reaction. I don't want you to think, oh my goodness, I better not drink water anymore because I might burst my cells, and it could be very bad for me. But it has happened. Lots of times people who are in the military, maybe it's happened a few times where they're training and they drink so much water, it causes a bad reaction to the things that can go on like that. But you just gotta know it can go both ways. It's the same thing with a plant. Sometimes a plant will die and the little kid will say, I don't know why it's dying, I water it every day. Well, he's literally watering too much of it, right? He's putting way too much water in there, and then as he sees it starting to look like it's dying, he adds more water and adds more water and adds more water. You're actually flooding the plant with too much water, okay? So we gotta be careful with that. Awesome. You know the organelles of a plant. They'll ask you that 6 on your worksheet today to be able to get some of those things straight. So that would be good to use this thing here to get those things answered. And then they'll ask you a couple other questions. Blessings on your day.